Please, state your name and rank for the record, and try to stop your tail from hitting the legs of my expensive slate-grey table. It's vibrating my tea," Sarn-On said, his voice a low, dry rasp. He sat across from me in the interrogation chamber, his obsidian-black scales absorbing what little dim amber light filtered through the dusty ceiling vents. His 4 eyes were stacked vertically, the top pair blinking in sync while the bottom pair remained fixed on my twitching whiskers. "Zylos, lead geneticist, grade 4. And I can't help the tail thumping. It's a physiological response to the fact that my entire career just melted into a puddle of prehistoric sludge," I replied, smoothing down my teal fur. Every time I thought about the lab, a fresh spike of anxiety caused my fur to stand up on end, crackling with tiny blue sparks of static electricity. I looked like a frustrated, glowing pom-pom. Sarn-On leaned forward, his long, elegant reptilian arms resting on the desk. He flicked his forked tongue, tasting the air. "The report says you found something in the human. Something that hasn't existed since the stars were young. Explain how one small, messy creature named Bonnie managed to violate every law of biological containment we have on this station." I sighed, my whiskers drooping. It started during a routine health screening. Bonnie was a tourist. She had been wandering the corridors for 3 hours because she thought the high-hazard biostorage sign was a fancy way of saying gift shop. She walked right into the lab, tripped over a specimen crate, and spilled her juice on the primary sequencer. When the alarm went off, she didn't run. She just stood there trying to wipe the juice off the billion credit sensors with the sleeve of her jumpsuit. "And the DNA," Sarn-On prompted, his 4 amber eyes narrowing. "We took a blood sample to check for contamination," I said, my tail giving a particularly loud thud against the floor. "I expected human DNA. You know the type, fragile, carbon-based, mostly junk. But when the results came back, the computer didn't just beep, it screamed. It played a funeral march and then shut itself down. Deep inside her cells, tucked away like a hidden weapon, was a sequence of extinct DNA. It belonged to the Apex-Venator, the creature that consumed 3 galaxies before the first expansion." The heavy door to the interrogation room slid open with a screeching metallic groan. A massive rock-skinned guard ducked his head to enter, his stony shoulders scraping the charcoal-colored frame. He carried a tray with a single tiny cup of water. As he reached the table, his thick, rocky fingers fumbled, and he accidentally crushed the cup into a fine powder. He stared at the dust for a long moment, then turned around and walked straight into the closed door with a loud thud before finding the handle. "Professionalism is at an all-time high, I see," Sarn-On remarked dryly, watching the guard stumble out. "Continue, Zylos. What did Bonnie do once you told her she was carrying the most dangerous genetic material in the universe?" "She asked if it meant she could grow cool wings," I said, my fur crackling again. "She wasn't scared, she was delighted. She told me her grandfather always said she had strong bones, and she figured this was what he meant. I tried to explain that this DNA was supposed to be dead. It was a ghost, a biological impossibility. But then she started poking the containment field. She wanted to see if the pretty blue lights would make her fingers tingle." Sarn-On's tail curled around the leg of his chair. "And that's when the escalation began?" "Exactly. The moment her skin touched the high-frequency field, her DNA didn't just react, it recognized the energy. It woke up. I watched through the observation glass as her shadow started moving independently of her body. It didn't look like a girl with a ponytail anymore. It looked like something with too many teeth and a hunger that could swallow a moon. Bonnie just laughed and said her shadow was doing the funky chicken. Then she sneezed." "A sneeze," Sarn-On repeated, his scales shifting to a dull, confused grey. "A sneeze," I confirmed. A microscopic droplet of her saliva hit the industrial olive wall. Within 3 seconds, the wall started growing hair. Then it grew a row of serrated teeth and tried to eat the janitor's mop. As if on cue, the small, floating crustacean scribe sitting in the corner of the room dropped his stylus. It clattered loudly against the slate floor. The scribe scurried down from his stool, his many tiny legs clicking, and spent several minutes chasing the rolling stylus under Sarn-On's chair, bumping into the Inquisitor's shins repeatedly. Sarn-On didn't move, but his nostrils emitted a sharp puff of green vapor that smelled faintly of scorched pine. The wall became sentient, Sarn-On asked, once the scribe had climbed back up. Worse, I said. It became prehistoric. The DNA in Bonnie isn't a blueprint, it's a virus of reality. It rewrites everything it touches into its own image. By the time I reached the emergency shut-off, the lab benches had sprouted claws. The ceiling was dripping with a digestive enzyme that smelled like cinnamon. And Bonnie? She was in the middle of it all, trying to teach the puppy wall how to sit. She had named it Barnaby. You are telling me, Sarn-On said slowly, that a single human female turned a multi-billion credit research facility into a carnivorous jungle because she had a tickle in her nose. I am telling you that humans are not survivors of the Great Extinction, I replied. My teal fur, now standing out so far, I looked twice, my normal size. They are the cause. We always wondered why the most terrifying predators in history just vanished. They didn't vanish. The humans caught them. They folded them up, tucked them into their genetic code, and used them as a storage drive. Humans are just biological suitcases for monsters, and Bonnie had lost the key. The rock-skinned guard returned, this time carrying a broom to sweep up the cup he had crushed earlier. As he swept, he accidentally knocked a heavy bronze bust off a pedestal. The bust narrowly missed my head, smashing into the floor and leaving a crater in the muted grey tile. The guard muttered something that sounded like falling gravel and shuffled away. The situation in the biostorage vault became untenable, I continued, ignoring the near-death experience. The automated defense turrets tried to target the anomalies, but the turrets turned into giant, feathered lizards before they could fire. Bonnie thought the lizards were adorable and tried to feed them her space protein bar. The bar turned into a small, screaming shrub. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with a breakout. We were dealing with a homecoming. Sarn-On leaned back, his 4 eyes blinking in a slow, rhythmic pattern. A homecoming for what, Zylos? For the DNA. It didn't want to leave Bonnie. It wanted to turn the station into Bonnie. Or rather, what Bonnie used to be 10 million years ago. I saw a maintenance drone fly past the window. It had grown a tail, not a mechanical tail, a real, fleshy, wagging tail. The drone looked confused, Sarn-On. It was trying to oil a joint, but it kept stopping to scratch behind its sensors with its new limb. The crustacean scribe let out a high-pitched whistle, waving his tablet. Sir, the medic is here with the sedative you requested for the witness. A gelatinous, translucent blob in a tiny, oversized lab coat wobbled into the room. It didn't have a face, but it moved with a sense of urgent professional duty. It slid across the floor, leaving a trail of medicinal-smelling slime, and attempted to inject a syringe of blue liquid into the slate table. After several failed attempts to find a vein in the rock, the medic sighed, a sound like a wet sponge being squeezed, and wobbled back out the door. That wasn't for me, was it? I asked, watching the slime trail shimmer in the dim light. No, Sarn-On said, his voice dropping to a whisper. It was for the table, just in case it starts growing teeth. Tell me the rest, Geneticist. Tell me how the human reacted when the entire station started breathing. She asked if there was a snack bar, I said, my voice trembling. She walked through a hallway of pulsing, vein-covered walls, stepping over puddles of primordial ooze, and complained that the lighting was a bit depressing. I was trailing behind her, carrying a demolecularizer that I was too terrified to use, while she pointed at a 3-headed avian beast that used to be a coffee machine and said, "Oh, look at the birdies." She has no fear? Sarn-On asked. She has no concept of fear, I corrected him. She is the apex of the apex. The DNA inside her is so terrifying that the rest of the universe's horrors look like toys to her. She's not the victim of the extinction DNA. She is its keeper. When a pack of mutated, six-legged wolves cornered us in the observation deck, Bonnie didn't scream. She just clapped her hands and told them they were good boys and needed a bath. "Sarn-On," the wolves cried. They tucked their tails and ran into the vents. They were terrified of her. The rock-skinned guard appeared in the doorway again, his stony face looking uncharacteristically pale. He didn't enter this time. He just pointed a trembling finger toward the hallway. The walls," he rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. "The walls are starting to purr." I looked at Sarn-On. My fur was now emitting a constant hum of static electricity, and a few sparks jumped from my whiskers to the metal table. "It's starting again, isn't it? The containment isn't holding." Sarn-On stood up, his tall reptilian frame casting a long, jagged shadow against the charcoal wall. His four eyes were wide, the pupils blown out into circles of pure amber. "We brought her here to study the past, Zylos. But we didn't realize the past was still hungry. If what you're saying is true, we aren't interrogating a witness. We're sitting inside the stomach of a goddess who doesn't even know she's eating us." "She's not eating us," I said, my tail thumping a frantic rhythm. "She's just redecorating, and she has very, very bad taste in upholstery." From the hallway, we heard a cheerful voice echoing through the muted bronze corridors. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" I found a big scaly cat in the vents, and he says his name is Emergency Override. "Does anyone have a laser pointer? I think he wants to play." I looked at the door. I looked at Sarn-On. I looked at the crustacean scribe, who had finally given up on his stylus and was now trying to eat his own tablet. "That's her," I whispered. "That's Bonnie." The door didn't open. It dissolved. The metal didn't melt. It simply turned into a swarm of metallic butterflies that fluttered away into the dim light. Standing in the threshold was Bonnie, grinning widely, her jumpsuit covered in glowing prehistoric moss. In her arms, she was cradling a small snarling lizard that had clearly once been a high-security encryption key. "Hey guys," Bonnie chirped, stepping into the room. "The floor is feeling a bit squishy, so I thought I'd come find the grown-ups. Is this the party? I brought a snack." She held out the snapping, hissing lizard key. Sarn-On backed away so quickly he tripped over his own tail, crashing into the slate table with a sound like a falling mountain. I just sat there, my teal fur standing straight out in every direction, glowing like a neon beacon of pure, unadulterated terror. "Bonnie," I squeaked, my whiskers twitching, "please put the encryption key down." "Oh, he's fine," she said, patting the lizard on its scaly head. "He just needs a nap. Everything in this place is so cranky. You guys need to relax. I feel great. It's like my blood is singing. Do you hear that? It sounds like drums." I heard it. It wasn't drums. It was the heartbeat of a station that was no longer made of metal and glass, but of bone and sinew. The interrogation was over. The evolution had begun. And as Bonnie skipped toward the Inquisitor to show him her new pet, I realized that the universe had spent millions of years trying to forget why it was afraid of the dark. Bonnie was here to remind us. Sarn-On didn't just back away, he scrambled up the wall. His obsidian scale scraped against the charcoal-colored stone as his four amber eyes tracked the small, snapping lizard in Bonnie's hands with the intensity of a doomed moon watching a black hole. His prehensile tail was wrapped so tightly around a ceiling light fixture that the metal began to groan. "Get it away. Zylos, tell the human to cease the biological encroachment immediately." "Bonnie, please," I whispered, my teal fur now vibrating with so much static electricity that small bolts of blue lightning were jumping to the armrests of my chair. I looked like a glowing underwater sea urchin. The Inquisitor is sensitive to prehistoric reptiles that used to be government property. "You guys are so high-strung," Bonnie said, her voice echoing with a strange harmonic resonance that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago. She set the lizard key down on the slate table. The moment its claws touched the stone, the table let out a soft, low-frequency purr. A patch of soft olive-green moss bloomed instantly where the creature sat. He just wanted to say hi. And honestly, Sarn-On, you should see the hallway. It's way prettier now. It's got these big glowing flowers that look like they're breathing. Very retro. The flowers are pulmonary vents, Bonnie, I shrieked, my whiskers twitching in a frantic, uneven rhythm. The station is growing lungs. We are currently being inhaled by the infrastructure. The door hissed open again. Though hissed was perhaps the wrong word, it sounded more like a heavy intake of breath. The rock-skinned guard stumbled back into the room, his stony arms covered in what looked like rapidly growing ivy. He was trying to brush it off, but every time he swiped at a vine, it wrapped around his fingers and started tickling him. The guard let out a rumble of gravelly laughter that sounded like a rock slide. He tried to salute Sarn-On, but his hand got stuck to his head by a particularly sticky piece of prehistoric sap. He eventually gave up and started trying to eat a piece of fruit that had just sprouted from his own shoulder. The security staff is being digested by their own uniforms, and you're worried about the decor? Sarn-On hissed from the ceiling, his tongue flicking toward a vent that was now dripping thick, translucent amber nectar. I think the guard looks nice, Bonnie noted, poking a finger at a glowing, bulbous plant growing out of the guard's elbow. It matches his eyes. The small crustacean scribe, who had been hiding under the table, suddenly let out a high-pitched trill. He didn't just drop his stylus this time. He watched in horror as the stylus grew roots, dug itself into the floor, and blossomed into a small, angry-looking fern that immediately tried to swat at his pincers. The scribe scurried across the floor, his many legs clicking a panicked rhythm, and attempted to climb up my leg. I hoisted him up, and he sat on my shoulder, shivering so hard his shell rattled against my ear. We need to get to the primary core, I said, trying to stand up while balanced by a terrified crustacean. If Bonnie's DNA reaches the main computer, it won't just be the station that changes. The signal will broadcast to the entire sector. We'll have a galaxy-wide outbreak of whatever this is. I call it the Big Vibe, Bonnie suggested, walking toward the door. As she moved, the floor beneath her feet rippled like water, turning from cold, muted slate into a warm, spongy carpet of bioluminescent fungi. Come on, Zylos. Let's go find the big brain machine. I want to see if I can make it play music. Everything's too quiet in here. Sarn-On dropped from the ceiling, landing with a heavy thud that caused a nearby wall lamp to turn into a giant, unblinking eye. He adjusted his obsidian black tunic, trying to maintain his dignity even though his scales were starting to shimmer with a faint, iridescent oil. Fine. If we must move through this biological nightmare to save the sector, we move. But if that human tries to pet me, I am authorized to use lethal force, even if my weapon has currently turned into a very confused bird. He held up his holster. Instead of a demolecularizer, a small, fluffy avian creature with 4 wings was nesting in the grip, chirping happily. Sarn-On looked at it with pure, cold hatred. We stepped out into the corridor, and I nearly lost my fur's remaining static charge from the sheer shock. The industrial, muted drab hallway was gone. In its place was a cathedral of organic horror and beauty. The walls were lined with pulsing, translucent veins the size of tree trunks, pumping glowing blue fluid through the station. Giant, fern-like structures reached down from the ceiling, their fronds glowing with a soft amber light that illuminated the thick mist rolling across the floor. The gelatinous medic wobbled past us again, but it had undergone a transformation. It was no longer a translucent blob. It had grown a series of colorful internal organs that pulsed like a neon sign. It was currently busy trying to heal a section of the wall that had developed a cough. The medic was slapping wet, medicinal leaves onto the pulsing veins, making a rhythmic thwack 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 sound that echoed through the organic tunnel. See, Bonnie said, skipping through a puddle of primordial soup that smelled surprisingly like vanilla. It's like a park. A very damp, very toothy park. The walls are breathing, Bonnie, I said, my tail dragging through the moss. I can hear the station's heartbeat. It's syncing with yours. Don't you see? The DNA we found in you, the stuff that killed the ancient galaxy, it's not a weapon. It's a terraforming engine. And it thinks this station is a barren planet that needs a little sprucing up. Well, it wasn't exactly home and garden before, Bonnie countered. She stopped to pat a giant, fleshy valve that was opening and closing like a giant mouth. Good job, big guy. Keep those juices flowing. Suddenly, the floor bucked. A massive tremor shook the station, sending Sarn-On crashing into the mossy wall. The rock-skinned guard, who had been following us while munching on his shoulder fruit, fell over and rolled like a giant boulder, knocking over a cluster of glowing mushrooms. The core is rejecting the change. Sarn-On yelled, his 4 eyes spinning in different directions as he tried to find his footing. The mechanical systems are fighting back. We're going to have a total structural collapse. A series of mechanical shrieks echoed from the vents. The station's original AI, or what was left of it, was trying to activate the fire suppression system. Instead of water, the nozzles sprayed a thick, purple gas that immediately condensed into tiny, flying insects. The insects swarmed the room, glowing with a fierce red light. "Oh, look, fireflies!" Bonnie shouted, reaching out to catch one. "Those aren't fireflies, they're localized combustion spores." I screamed, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the core access hatch. "If they hit a high oxygen pocket, we're all going to be very well done." The crustacean scribe on my shoulder let out a series of frantic whistles, pointing his tiny claws toward the end of the hall. The maintenance drone we had seen earlier was back, but it had fully evolved into a hovering, metallic cephalopod. It was using its new tentacles to rip out the remaining metal plating from the walls, exposing the raw, pink muscle of the station beneath. It looked at us with a single glowing red sensor and let out a sound like a synthesizer falling down a flight of stairs. "Inside, now!" Sarn-On commanded, shoving the rock-skinned guard through the hatch. We tumbled into the primary core chamber. Usually, this was a sterile, cold room filled with humming servers and flickering monitors. Now, it looked like the inside of a giant, high-tech heart. The central processor was encased in a thick, crystalline amber. Long, glowing filaments of Bonnie's DNA were wrapped around the cooling towers like glowing serpents. In the center of the room stood a tall, slender figure. It was the High Counselor, or at least, the holographic projection of him. The image was flickering wildly, and his digital face was being overwritten by images of prehistoric landscapes and screaming monsters. "Citizens," the hologram stuttered, his voice distorted by the sound of rushing water. The error. The jungle is quite lovely this time of error. Exterminate the glitch." "The AI has gone feral," Sarn-On said, drawing his bird gun. The bird chirped and bit his finger. "Zylos, do something. Use your science. Use your logic. Use anything that isn't a hug." I ran to the main console, which was now a soft, fleshy podium covered in blinking, organic buttons that felt like eyeballs. "I can't. The interface is biological. I don't know how to speak Apex-Venator." "I do," Bonnie said, stepping forward. She looked at the pulsing, glowing core with a strange, knowing smile. "It's not angry, Zylos. It's just lonely. It's been stuck in a tiny little cell for millions of years. It just wants to stretch its legs. Bonnie, if it stretches its legs any further, this station will turn into a literal planet, and we will be the first occupants of its stomach." I cried, my fur now so electrified that I was hovering an inch off the ground. Bonnie ignored me. She walked right up to the central core. The glowing filaments reached out toward her, swaying like seaweed in a gentle current. Sarn-On watched, his scales shifting through a dozen different shades of terrified grey. The rock-skinned guard paused his fruit snacking to watch, his heavy jaw hanging open. Even the gelatinous medic, who had followed us in, stopped trying to heal the floor and sat very still. "Hey there," Bonnie whispered, placing her hands on the warm, pulsing amber. "I know. It's a lot, right? But you gotta chill. These are my friends." "Well, Zylos is my friend. Sarn-On is more of a grumpy uncle, but we like him anyway." The station groaned. The heartbeat slowed. The flickering red lights of the combustion spores faded into a soft, sleepy blue. The pulsing veins in the walls narrowed, the flow of fluid becoming a gentle, steady thrum. She's talking it down? Sarn-On whispered, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. She's negotiating with a prehistoric extinction event? She's not negotiating, I said, my fur finally beginning to settle as the static charge dissipated. She's the alpha. She's giving the DNA a command, and the DNA is obeying. Bonnie turned back to us, her face glowing with a soft, ethereal light. It's okay now. I told it that it can stay, but it has to stop trying to eat the furniture, and it has to fix the coffee machine. I'm really thirsty. The transformation didn't reverse, but it stabilized. The station remained a biological marvel, a living, breathing organism of muted bronzes and deep mossy greens, but the teeth disappeared. The walls stopped trying to cough. The maintenance drone squid went back to its duties, though it did stop occasionally to scratch its tentacles. The rock-skinned guard let out a long, rumbling sigh and offered a piece of his shoulder fruit to Sarn-On. To my absolute shock, the Inquisitor took a bite. It's surprisingly citrusy, Sarn-On admitted, his tail flicking with a hint of relaxation. He looked at Bonnie, then at me. Geneticist, what are we going to tell the High Council? That humans aren't the survivors of the extinction, I said, picking up the crustacean scribe and setting him back on his stool. The scribe immediately began drawing a picture of a flower on his tablet. We'll tell them that the extinction event never ended. It just found a really nice place to stay, and as long as Bonnie is happy, the galaxy stays in one piece. And if she gets unhappy? Sarn-On asked, looking at the glowing, toothless walls. Then I suggest we start practicing our tree-climbing skills, I replied. Bonnie skipped toward the exit, the floor humming happily beneath her sneakers. Come on, guys. I think the cafeteria is growing giant strawberries now. Who wants a snack? As we followed her out of the core, I realized that my teal fur would probably never be the same. It was still a little frizzy, and I had a strange urge to go for a swim in the station's new internal lake. But, as I watched the human girl laughing with a rock man and a lizard official in a living forest floating through space, I couldn't help but feel a little bit of that big vibe myself. The universe wasn't dying, it was just evolving, and honestly, the new decor was starting to grow on me. Literally. I looked down at my arm and realized a small blue daisy had sprouted from my elbow. Oh, for the love of, I muttered, but I didn't pull it out. It matched my fur, after all. Zylos, Bonnie called out from the hallway. The elevator has a tongue now, and it says we can go to the top floor if we give it a high five. Coming, Bonnie, I yelled, thumping my tail against the soft, mossy floor. Sarn-On, you go first. You're better at high fives. The Inquisitor just groaned, his 4 eyes rolling in perfect, synchronized frustration, but as he walked past me, I noticed he was carefully hiding the 4-winged bird in his pocket. It was going to be a long, very strange era for the galaxy.